Folks, I want to talk a little bit about what's going on in China. We talked about this yesterday with Hong Kong and the president, and it's very interesting to me. And I didn't really see any headlines about this, but it was interesting to me that the president did not go ahead with the tariffs that he was supposed to, and everyone said Trump is weak. Trump can't do it. He doesn't. It was all a big bluff. And there was not one mainstream article that I saw that said maybe this has something to do with Hong Kong. Maybe he didn't put it in because of what's going on with Hong Kong. Here to talk more about this, we've got Dr. Michael Busler, who's a public policy analyst and economics expert, a professor of finance at Stockton University in New Jersey. You've read his stuff at Newsmax, LifeSet, and townhall.com. Dr. Busler, it's always great to talk to you.
Good morning, Paul. How are you? It's always my pleasure to be here.
I am doing well. So
Good.
Your initial thoughts on what's going on in Hong Kong? It seems like it's a powder keg,
Yeah, it certainly is. There's very tense relations between the people of Hong Kong and China, who really controls Hong Kong. And it really has to do with some freedoms that the people of Hong Kong want. And China, of course, wants to maintain their iron grip on Hong Kong. So how important is Hong Kong to China? Well, they're only about 3% of China's GDP, so it's not a huge amount if there was a big problem. However, Hong Kong is a financial capital for much of Asia, and China, which has to raise large amounts of capital, goes through Hong Kong. And if there is a problem, it could severely impact China's ability to get more capital, and that will slow their economy even further. It's hard to tell how much their economy has slowed because we're not sure we're getting completely accurate information. But for the last decade, they said their economy is growing at about a 10% annual rate, which is a phenomenal growth rate. By their own admission, they say that the growth rate is down to 5 or 6%. Still a fairly healthy growth rate, but much less than what they've had in the past. I suspect they're being a little bit optimistic with those numbers, and I think their growth rate has slowed even more. Regarding President Trump, he's pushing hard for a new trade agreement with every one of our trading partners, and the reason is very simple. When he got into office, he examined every trade agreement, and for whatever reason, every agreement was slanted in favor of our trading partners and to the detriment of the U.S. For instance, in the automobile industry, they make a car in Europe, sell it in the U.S., we charge a 2.5% tariff. They make a car in China, sell it in the U.S., we charge a 2.5% tariff. On the other hand, we make a car in the U.S. and sell it in Europe, they charge a 10% tariff. We make a car in the U.S., sell it in China, they charge a 25% tariff. Well, the result of that has been that we're buying more of their cars. The tariffs are small and the prices are more reasonable, so our money flows out of the country. They're not buying very many of our cars because the tariffs have raised the prices, so not much of their money is coming into the country, and we have this huge negative balance of trade. So President Trump said to every trading partner, we have to renegotiate these. Everyone was in no hurry to do that because they're so favorable to them. So what did President Trump do? Now remember, he's not a politician, he's a business person. A business person, when you have a reluctant trading partner, you create a sense of urgency. And that's exactly what he did. He put tariffs on everything for everybody. Already, Mexico and Canada have come up with a new deal. South Korea has agreed to a new deal. Japan and India are talking to us, and now we need to get China in line. And that's what President Trump is trying to do, come up with a favorable trade deal with China. Now, there's all kinds of other variables in this. The Chinese economy is very important to the world economy. We don't want to contribute to a global recession. And there's politics involved in this, too. We're trying to deal with North Korea, and China's sort of on their side on things. So there's a lot involved here. But the ultimate goal is to come up with a good trade agreement. He doesn't want to necessarily hurt anybody. He just wants to force people to the table so they come up with a fair and free trade agreement, and that's what's happening.
So, do you think him not putting those tariffs into place when they were scheduled, do you think it had to do with some of the unrest in Hong Kong? Kind of a, I mean, you know, all these things are connected. I mean, if you were a businessman, you know, you're going to look at all of the variables, which is a lot of presidents don't do that.
Right. Yeah. So there's a lot to see here, as you just said, and we don't know what's happening on the inside. I suspect that there was some indication from China that they're willing to be more open to a fair trade deal. Remember, we had a deal back in April, and President Trump set a May 1st deadline. We had a deal back in April. We're all set to sign it. China, at the last minute, decides we're not going to go along with what we said we're going to go along with. So President Trump could have put tariffs in then. He said, look, I'll give you till September 1st to come up with an agreement. Well, it's approaching September 1st. There's no agreement. President Trump said, I told you if there's no agreement, I'm going to put additional tariffs on September 1st, which he was all set to do. I suspect there was some talk between China and the U.S. indicating if you just give a little more time, we can probably work this out. So President Trump, he's very patient. Remember, President Trump plays the long game. He's not interested necessarily in winning a specific battle. He's just interested in winning the war at the end. So I believe what he said was, okay, China, I'll give you another 90 days. If we can come up with something or get reasonably close to coming up with something within 90 days, we'll not put on any more tariffs, and indeed we may reduce some of the tariffs. So I think we're getting a little closer, and I think he said, I'll give you 90 days more to try to come up with something.
We're talking with Dr. Michael Busler. He's a economist, professor, public policy analyst. You know, we've got these Hong Kong protesters waving the American flag, singing the national anthem, according to reports. And it dawned on me yesterday. I was like, ugh. You know, I mean, Beijing sees that, and they don't like that. I mean, you know, we may look at it and be like, yeah, America still stands for something globally, like freedom of speech, freedom to assemble. But China sees that, and they're got to be very worried about that. And I think that's why the troops are amassing on the border. And you know, I've wondered. I mean, I don't know. This is just a blatant speculation, but I mean, are we behind this in any way? Is America behind this in any way? You know, attempting to not only protect the freedoms of the people of Hong Kong have, but maybe to kind of be an agitator. I mean, who knows? I mean, the president did tweet, you know, some people think that I'm responsible for what's going on in Hong Kong, and I don't know why. I mean, and you know, we have the Chinese now not allowing us to send our warships to port in Hong Kong. So, but you know, I've heard very little speculation of the media that there are other moving parts that we can't see. It's really just like Trump can't do it. He's inept, and he's not sticking up for the Hong Kong protesters. That's the mainstream media's take on this.
Yeah, I would say that the U.S. generally doesn't have a position where we go and agitate, generally. And you never know exactly what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
But we usually don't try to agitate. However, if we see a repressed people who are longing for freedom, we tend to do what we can to support that without necessarily causing a direct conflict with, in this case, the Chinese. So I think what the people in Hong Kong are saying by waving the American flag and singing the national anthem is that they want their freedom, and they're willing to fight for their freedom. Now, China can't allow that to happen. I don't know whether it'll get as nasty as what happened back in the 80s in Tiananmen Square, where that got very nasty.
Yeah.
But as you point out, they are building up troops on the border, and they may use those troops to try to quell this whole thing, especially because it's tying up the Hong Kong airport. which is one of the busiest in the world and really the busiest in Asia. And that's going to have a bunch of negative effects on the economy of not just China, but perhaps other countries in Asia, is what the fear is. So we don't know how strong China will be and what kind of a response ultimately China will have. I don't think China's going to let this go on a lot longer. It is hurting them both economically and politically, so I don't think they're going to let this go on much longer, but I'm not sure that they would go full force like they did with Tiananmen Square. So there's a lot of variables here. The U.S. certainly supports any people that are longing for freedom. The U.S. will do what they can to support that, and I think that's the case here.
If you had to guess or speculate right now or pick a side, do you think the Chinese agree to a trade deal with the United States before the 2020 elections?
If I had to speculate, and as you've said, there are so many variables involved here, but I think they will come up with an agreement before the 2020 election. Their economy is hurting significantly. They can't sell because of the tariffs. They can't sell a lot of products like steel, and that's causing them to have to lay off people. When they retaliate by putting tariffs on food products. Now, that hurts the Chinese people, too. The reason U.S. manufacturers are over there in the first place is the labor cost is extremely low, and it's cheaper to make things over there. Well, if the labor cost is low, it means people's wages are low. So they have low wages, and now you're raising the cost of food to people with low wages, and that causes, obviously, a lot of problems and tensions. So I don't think China can allow this to go on for another year or so, and I think they're going to come to the table and come up with something, I believe, before the 2020 election.
Dr. Michael Busler, it is always great to talk to you, sir. Really appreciate your thoughts and your analysis.
Thank you, Paul. It's my pleasure. Look forward to doing it again.
Absolutely.